I was talking about my own entree into this world. Largely came about because of stress and sense of overwhelm. So this is something I was personally affected by, and then started looking for solutions myself. And then, as an academic and as a professor here, I got interested in the topic as well. So this is very much IMD style research in that we have gone to people that work closely with us, learning officers, CHROs, etc. And the insights that I'm presenting is very much shared from talking to them and then putting together my own thoughts. So I'm going to start with a poll, and essentially the statement is my employer cares about my overall well-being, and you'll have these 5 choices from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So let me launch the poll, and I would be much obliged if you could get onto your keyboards and respond to the poll. So again, I hope the poll is launched okay. So on my side, it has. So I can't see the poll. Let me see. So let me end the poll. Okay. So I see people voting. So there it is now. Yeah. Thank you, Vicky. All right. So okay. So I see people voting still. So still some numbers coming in. All right. So I think all of us here that can vote have voted. So let me. Oh, one more, maybe one more. Yeah. Okay, so let me end the poll and share the results with you. So good news is that there are no strongly disagrees, but there are neutral and agrees the most. And I saw, so there's a little bit of a mess in that there is strongly disagree again. Let's assume that was taken as strongly agree. So the most that we have is on strongly agree. I'll come back to this poll because it's not my poll, but I'm using it from another source. So we'll come back to that. Okay. So let me then talk about kind of a framework for well-being. So this is called the wheel of well-being. So if you think about well-being broadly, then it's all of these elements. So the relational and emotional, you could think about this as mental well-being. There's workplace well-being, there's physical well-being, material well-being, and spiritual well-being. So this is kind of the broad conception of well-being. So when you're talking about employers and employees, so we are within the workplace well-being realm, but then clearly it affects the other elements as well. So if we look at the spectrum of well-being, it goes all the way from flourishing, healthy, and excelling to reacting and thriving, and then moving towards coping and surviving, and then to struggling and strained, and finally to languishing and burnout. So again, there's been a lot of research into specific occupations about how this plays out. So there is one which was originally looking at physicians, and I have adapted this model here, and it's very much relevant to where I am because this is sometimes referred to as the Swiss cheese model. So from flourishing, healthy, excelling, where when we are in organizations, we are always faced with some kind of moral injury, and the moral injury might be because there is a clash between our own values and what is being kind of purveyed or advocated in the organization. There is hypocrisy that we see in the organization. So somehow, at an individual level, we are hurt. So formally, it is perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to, or learning about acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. So again, in the physician context where this research was done, it was looking at kind of misalignment of values between physicians themselves, so doctors and the hospitals that they were in. Sometimes the commercial interests of the hospital overriding what were, you know, the justifiable things that you could do with patients. So then kind of that's the first step of the flourishing kind of pillar being disturbed. And then if we move on to the next stage, then there is accumulated stress that is unresolved. And we know increasingly from research that stress that is unresolved then somehow manifests itself in the body, and kind of brilliantly written up by Bessel van der Kolk in the book The Body Keeps the Score. So again, it's a translation of how the moral injury that we feel mentally then becomes somehow transcribed in the body. And then, of course, if it's extreme, then it takes on the dimension of trauma. And from unresolved stress, as it piles up, it moves into dysregulation, and this topic has been kind of framed in terms of the window of tolerance. At what stage are you somehow balanced in terms of responses to your environment? So on the high side, when you are hyper aroused, there is the fight or flight response. So you feel attacked or attacking or confronting, angry and irritable. You tend to sabotage yourself, and there's a lot of anxiety. So this is at the hyperarousal stage. But there is also the freezing stage, which is the hypoarousal. So this is kind of quietening down, empty feeling, being numb, being shut down, being detached from what's going on around you, being compliant or just yielding or surrendering, and then rationalizing or justifying kind of situations that you find yourself in that you somehow are not engaged with or aligned with. And then this leads to maladaptive coping, and then languishing and burnout. So this is very much a kind of individual's journey from the flourishing or excelling spectrum of well-being into the languishing or burnout. And this is a phenomenon that we are seeing increasingly in organizations. Um, uh, so what I want to say is that, complementing the individual side is, of course, the organizational side. So those of us here in this webinar are working in organizations, have responsible positions in organizations. So it's not just about how individual employees are navigating this environment, but also what is it that organizations are doing, because clearly the culture of the organization, how work or jobs are designed, and kind of the way leadership plays out in these organizations has an important bearing on whether employees are flourishing or languishing, and kind of balancing that are job demands that we have and resources that we have available. So in terms of the organizational side, what I would say is that COVID has, had one big effect in that it has put the organizational factors of well-being very much in focus. So, I mean, we see this all over. So while there was a peak of attention, especially on mental health in COVID, that has kind of stabilized a little bit more, and the question really then is, how can organizations structure well-being? So, how do you think about it? Who owns it? And if there was a framework to um, think about how you would orchestrate it in an organization, what would that look like? So what I'm presenting very much is a framework that came from kind of the beginnings of my research into this topic. So hopefully it's something that is useful. So it's a 4 eyes framework. So these are all elements starting with I. So initiatives. So what kind of initiatives would you think about? The second point being, how do you implement the initiatives that you decide upon? The third point being, how do you measure or how do you track the impact of the initiatives that you have? And finally, um, being a kind of informed skeptic about this, and I have good reasons why you should have somewhat of a skeptical stance when it comes to well-being in organizations. So let's start with the first I, which is initiatives. So when I was researching the kind of world of well-being, came across many things that were mentioned by way of well-being. So kind of food, catering, especially late hours working in Silicon Valley or technology type companies, having food and drink available was mentioned as a well-being point. So there are kind of contemplative interventions. So mindfulness is clearly a popular one. So access to kind of a health service provider, providing a gym for fitness, having employee assistance programs that help in smoking cessation or addictions of various type. Sleep pods is another unusual one that I came across. And then things like laundry service. So again, I would be curious, in terms of your own experience, what are unusual or regular things that you've seen by way of initiatives that are not up here. I would be curious to know, and it would be helpful to see what are the other initiatives that are out there in terms of well-being. So if you'd like to share on the chat, so very much welcome to do that. Running groups, of course, yeah. So these are something that are increasingly being talked about as even possible substitutes for dating apps, for example. People want to meet face to face rather than remotely. So running groups are kind of both fitness and kind of the social connectedness side. And then the reality, all kinds of, yeah, okay, let's let's look at the initiatives. So support groups for parents and caregivers, indeed, yeah. Seminars, thank you, Regula, yeah. Talks by experts, yeah. Also access to kind of classes and courses, definitely, yeah. So again, Ivan, who's the head of people and culture development at Hilti. So while talking to him about how this plays out in Hilti, oh, George, of course, you wouldn't be too far from the topic of couple relationship insights. So that as well. So again, this is something that Ivan shared in that some companies have an impressive list of initiatives, but when you ask about usage, only 1 to 3% of employees are using them, which means the culture doesn't allow you to use them, or there is some kind of flaw in kind of the process by which you're introducing the initiatives into the organization. So again, so the key insight or the key takeaway I would say here is linking the portfolio of well-being initiatives to the company purpose and the people strategy. So this is something that we have very rarely seen, so quite often it is well-intentioned or something that high-power individual within the organization has experienced and then thinks that this would be a good idea to spread out there, and that's how it gets implemented. So if it was being done thoughtfully, you would have to start with the company purpose and how does the people strategy fit into that, and why is the set of well-being initiatives that you have in place connected to the people strategy that you have. So this is kind of just advice in terms of initiatives. So when it comes to implementation, implementation can be kind of thought through, joined up, systematic, or very ad hoc. So one of the more extreme cases of implementation that I came across was in this wonderful book by David Gellis. It's called Mindful Work, and David was one of the pioneers in writing about the mindfulness revolution that was sweeping up organizations. So he was already writing about this in the early 2000s, and then actually did a road trip to see what the different kind of contemplative interventions that were there in organizations. And he says, he went to this organization where they asked him to join in a well-being session, and was kind of eagerly observing what was going on. And he saw this room that was set up by this provider. It's a one-person provider, full of posters of very menacing athletes. So that was a kind of hyper aroused environment that he walked into. And then he said, out of nowhere, a boombox started playing some kind of folksy music, and this person appeared. I mean, and he was a white person in a completely Native American dress, and kind of did a shamanic type dance for 20 minutes, and kind of said that's it and moved on. So he was extremely puzzled by this intervention. So again, it's an example of kind of thoughtless implementation. Clearly, someone in the organization thought this was a good idea, but clearly extremely shoddy implementation. At the time I was doing the research, it was also intriguing to find that this title of Chief Wellbeing Officer was being proffered as well. And the most famous was Jen Fisher at Deloitte. And she had appeared on a lot of podcasts talking about why well-being is important and why organizations should think about a chief well-being officer. And when I checked back in and looked at the Deloitte website, so she has kind of moved on, and that position is not really there, which clearly kind of tells you that you need to have a certain scale to have it, and maybe coming right out of COVID, this was something that worked, but then wasn't really sustainable in the longer run. So are we at a stage where organizations, large ones, should be thinking about chief well-being officers? At least the empirical evidence for me right now is no, because Jen has moved on and gotten into the podcast business. So we'll be doing the Work Well podcast from January onwards. What is also very interesting is that there are a lot of platform providers for well-being initiatives. So a couple of them that we came across in our research were Juno, and again, this is a platform which is connecting a lot of providers to an organization that subscribes to them. So this, I mean, takes me back to kind of the plethora of initiatives. So how are you as an organization going to be able to pick and choose the ones that are relevant to you? Yes, platforms make this available, but so what? So it goes back to Ivan's comment about, yeah, you can offer a lot of things, but what is the take up? What is the relevance? There's also another platform called Thank Ben. So I mean, there they help you with things like webinars, blogs, benchmarking benefits, trying to find out the impact of what benefits do to your organization. So again, in terms of the implementation, if you want to outsource a part of the implementation, so we are now in an era where this is easily possible as well. So someone that is a long-term observer of the well-being trend is Andres Pricer, who's the dean of the Base Business School in London. And he says, most of the time, a well-being offer is essentially an outsourced call center where you can ring someone up and maybe, if you're lucky, be pointed to some online video. So again, the point being made here is that the implementation of this can be extremely unsystematic, irregular, not really thought through. And this is one of the pitfalls of well-being. So the advice here would be to determine the most effective means of delivering well-being programs to your employees. So what is a thought through joined up way in which you can provide well-being services to your employees. The next point, the fourth I, the third of the four I's is impact. Um, and an impact essentially means, are you tracking the effect of the initiatives that have been implemented? We had this poll. My employee cares about my overall well-being. So this is not from me. This is originally from Gallup. This is what Gallup reports, so when we are asked to respond to this, so if we respond in terms of highly agree, then apparently these are the outcomes that we see. So 71% less likely to report experiencing a lot of burnout, 69% less likely to actively search for a new job, 36% more likely to be thriving overall in their lives, 3 times more likely to be engaged at work, and 5 times more likely to be promoters, advocates, or telling other people that my organization is a great place to work. So this sounds great, but there is good reason to be sober about it, because when there have been systematic studies that have been done, the effect sizes of these interventions are at best small to moderate. So there's a recent report out by King's College looking at workplace mental health interventions, and they had looked at a range of interventions, so physical activity, contemplative interventions like mindfulness or yoga, resilience training, so putting people through kind of crisis simulations and things like that, cognitive behavioral therapy, and stigma reduction, especially of physical appearance, mental health issues, learning issues, and so forth. And they find, of course, the effect size varies a lot with the mode of delivery, whether it's face-to-face or virtual, the duration of the intervention, and also whether the intervention is targeted to a specific population or offered to everybody in the organization. So it's important to be, I think, sober about these findings from Gallup, which is likely the independent variable, which is how much does my employer care about my well-being, with the dependent variables being this. I mean, it was a kind of correlational study. So we have to be extremely careful about claims like this. Also, what experts say is that the populations segments in our organizations that need this often are the ones that are completely ignored. So Chris Tamjiji, who heads up Awareness, wonderful mindfulness consultancy, says, if you look at manufacturing workers, they are typically the lowest 10% in any organization in terms of mental health, so not so much towards the flourishing side, but to the languishing side. And if that's your biggest population, you'll have a big impact if you target this neglected segment of the workforce. So the advice then here is keep track of how initiatives impact employee well-being, what works and what doesn't work. Finally, we come to the fourth I, which is informed skepticism. And there's good reason to be skeptical, because if you look at the wheel of well-being, clearly one element of that is spiritual, and you have to ask, especially with contemplative type interventions, where is the boundary between what is organizational and what is personal. This is brought out in a brilliant book by Caroline Chen called The Work Pray Code, which is looking at contemplative practices that are offered in Silicon Valley. So these are all highly educated, highly skilled employees, but in many ways they're also looking for something that is incomplete in their lives, which is some kind of a feeling of spiritual belonging. So when we have very strong cultures that have some of these assumptions about spiritual beliefs embedded in them, the the boundary between what is personal and what is organizational becomes problematic. And by and large, as employees, we are dispensable to organizations. So when people leave an organization, they also leave a large part of their identity that somehow gets violated in the process of separation. So this is in terms of kind of boundaries, but there is also a classic kind of Marxist view that Ron Purser himself, a kind of mindfulness expert, takes in this, which he says, look, I mean, who's causing the stress? So again, as an employer, if you cause less stress to your employee, probably then they don't need all of these well-being services that you need to offer. So essentially, he says, in the end, who benefits? Whose labor is being exploited? So be very clear-eyed about this. So in some ways, rather than religion, maybe the well-being offer is the opium of the masses. Uh, and this is a term that we came across while we were doing this research, which is similar to kind of greenwashing or whitewashing, which is soul washing, when companies engage in well-being without really believing in it. So there is good reason to be skeptical when it comes to these interventions, because you will have to negotiate for yourself what is the boundary between you personally and the organization that you're working in. So, as an employer, you need to be sensitive to ethical concerns, which are likely to be raised by the interventions that you put out there, and you need to be skeptical of overblown claims of impact. So, this is the four eyes model. And as we were doing the research, there was one success story that we came across, and I thought I would share that with you, which is um, mindfulness in SAP. So this is Peter Bostelman, and his story is of being what he calls a close-set mindfulness practitioner. So he is originally German, an engineer, moved to Silicon Valley, was working on technical solutions for SAP, and then his partner went to a yoga and mindfulness class and then came back, and he observed the positive effects and then kind of um, take in um, take it in himself. So Julian raises a good point, which is shouldn't organizations be tackling the cause of stress? And this is very much the point that is made by Ron Purser, right? So as I said, there's individual journey and there's also the organizational. So things like culture, job design, leadership attitudes, these make a huge difference. So coming back to Peter, he was doing this mindfulness practice in the closet, as he said, and then as he traveled between Germany and the U.S., started coming across more and more people. So this is about 20 years ago. Um, he uh, he then said, how about thinking about this more formally, and then started talking to higher level executives. So in terms of the initiative that he thought about was mindfulness, was very much a bottom up process. And then kind of moving into the implementation, he was able to take some time and actually work with Natalie Lotzman, who at that time was the chief medical officer and the global head of health and well-being at SAP, and then kind of discussing with her about introducing mindfulness, and as part of writing a case about um, scaling up mindfulness in an organization, which again is a relatively new topic in terms of case writing. So Vicky, if you're listening, we've been pioneering in writing a case on in this area. So Natalie asked the right questions, which is to say, look, I have a lot of ongoing initiatives already. I need to understand, how does this fit with company purpose? How does it fit with people's strategy and so forth? So they had a robust discussion about it and then kind of agreed that this is something that would be helpful to employees in the organization. But at the same time, she left it to him to find a sponsor that is able to then offer this. So he found Wolfgang Fastenat, who was the head of HR in Germany, and he agreed to put just one course in the catalog. And Peter Bostelman joined with Search Inside Yourself, so a program that was originally created at Google but has now spun out and can be franchised. So Peter offered a Search Inside Yourself. It's a 2-day workshop, and the reaction to this was so enthusiastic that it became a much sought after course in Wolfgang's catalog. So having the high level sponsors. And also what they found was that using the Search Inside Yourself trainers and materials was expensive. So they then started focusing on training facilitators within SAP. So starting in 2015, they already started creating internal seminars where they could teach leaders to be mindfulness teachers as well. And that allowed them to kind of embed mindfulness in the organization. And this is something that leaders could do 20% of their time. So teaching a 2-day mindfulness workshop became part of their job. And this has kind of mushroom scaled and grown in a huge way in SAP. And one of the things that Peter Bostelman has done, as an engineer, is kept very close measures of before and after in terms of the impact of this intervention. So this is one example. So from the first 650 participants. So you can see that the report here is that overall level of happiness and well-being has gone up, as has the sense of satisfaction and meaning in the job that they're doing, ability to focus, level of mental clarity, new ideas, insights. And also what's gone down is the experience of overwhelm and stress, So clearly and you can see this 6 months after the course, as well as 4 weeks after the course. So clearly, this intervention is helping move people from the burning and languishing towards the more flourishing side of the wellness spectrum. And then, of course, this is what's happening to the participants. But what is very interesting in the SAP case is that in terms of the people strategy, this is linked overall to employee engagement. And they can clearly see that people who have done the mindfulness program report higher levels of employee engagement. And kind of using big data, SAP is able to figure out what a 1 or 2% lift in employee engagement translates in terms of kind of surplus for the organization. So they also see a reduction in sick leave of people who have been through the program. And the calculation that Bostelman presented to us is that the return on investment on this program is something like 200%, so which is wonderful as a well-being initiative. So it's great for the people going through the program and great for the organization as well. There is also, as people have come through the program, skepticism about what's going on. So, we talked to many people that had been through the program and then came across people who had, again, like the work pray code and like mindfulness, this sense of, what is personal here, what is organizational, does this align with my values? So Susan Anderson had this skepticism when she was asked to do something called a befriending practice in mindfulness. Thank you, Vicky, for the link to the case study. So Susan was asked to think about good feelings and compassionate feelings for not just fellow human beings, but all sentient beings, so which then takes it a little bit out of the secular realm into kind of spiritual or religious beliefs, So then we start the case study with the skepticism that one participant was experiencing, thinking about, whether I should be in a course like this, whether SAP should even be offering a course like this, and then kind of the discussions that emerged from that, which then helped align some of the conflict that she had. So this, for me, I mean, having kind of waded into this area, was a good success story, because in terms of our Four Eyes framework, so this was an initiative that was clearly bottom up, but then in the implementation joined up. Also one that has been impactful for the organization, and has always entertained a healthy level of skepticism in terms of its relevance to the organization. So that's what I had in terms of opening this discussion with yourselves on the promise and pitfalls of well-being in organizations. So on the chat, then happy to take any questions, comments, or observations that you might have. So anything that resonates from your experience, things that are here that you have been aware of, that we should be looking at as we look to move our research further. So would be happy to hear from you. So as Vicky has pointed out, the case study of SAP is already out there, so it's something that you can follow. Pretty soon we'll be publishing a story about this research as well. So we'll send out a link to that, which is called In the Field with SAP Mindfulness. So this is a question from Julien. So which is, I missed the start of the webinar, but why are employees stressed more than ever? Um, so I think this is certainly a feeling that we have, that employees are stressed more than ever. I think there are very good reasons. In that, there is geopolitical turbulence, there is the climate emergency. We have just come out of a huge kind of worldwide pandemic. But we don't know empirically whether this is, a particular period where people are more stressed than before, or is it just a sense that, that we have about, yeah, this is the most stressful time ever. Um, so how do you think, so this is a question, let me pick this one up from Violetta. How should a company or employer help employees with the private stressor? So this is, a part of offer in a lot of large companies, employee assistance programs. So this is one where you have a private issue, and then you can take it up with a therapist or a counselor. So there are kind of boundaries put around that, but again, in terms of the informed skepticism, there is a fear of, how much of this goes back to the organization. But certainly there are employers that do provide kind of access to contemplative practices or therapists. Devika has asked the question, has your research thrown up anything on what leaders, managers, bosses can do on a day-to-day basis to support their people and teams better? So again, this goes back in terms of the organizational responsibility. So I suppose, one thing that is different now, as opposed to a few years ago, is the recognition that this is an issue, and also increasingly training about awareness in terms of picking this up. Uh, that is in addition to all the supportive behaviors that leaders can show. So what I would say is kind of increasing awareness because of the availability of diagnosis, and also kind of training programs for people to I mean, by which I mean leaders to be able to spot others who are clearly in need of help. So that's the way I see Devika. Other than kind of having a supportive attitude. So Ali, says, thank you for the presentation. You're welcome, super useful. Would it be interesting to identify the main relationship models within an organization and empathy map, for example, to reduce psychological safety? So, so again, I think psychological safety is very much a topic that is connected with what we are doing here. So if we go back to what Devika was asking about, so in the last 15 years, certainly it's become clear that leaders who enable a greater sense of psychological safety, uh, actually it's the other way around. So leaders who don't enable a lot of psychological safety, we see people languishing, we see people suffering. So you also asked about kind of an empathy map. Okay, this is some research that I have done empirically with my colleague here, Ginka Togol. So we were using very much a network approach, and we were looking at and the question we asked three questions. So one was kind of a friendship network, which is like showing them. So this was in a company that had about 60 employees or so, saying showing them a list of all 60 and saying, who are you friends with? And then the second question was, who do you work with? Who are you interdependent upon? And then the third one we asked was, when you are troubled or stressed or frustrated, who do you turn to? So there were three different networks. So there was the friendship networks, there was the advice network, and the third network we called the toxin handling network. And what we found was that people who were what is called high self monitors. So this is an individual difference variable. So high self monitors tend to notice what is happening around them. So they're very situation sensitive. Low self monitors are kind of self focused. We found that higher status individuals, not absolutely high, but kind of middle managers who are higher on self monitoring, were the ones who were central to this kind of emotional toxicity network, and they were doing a lot of the sanitization of the toxic emotions that were there, even though they were not formally acknowledged or paid for it. So it is certainly possible to map this, and as Devika said, then maybe also have interventions on how you can handle toxicity within the organization, which is kind of above and beyond creating greater psychological safety. So, Shantaram's observation, somehow I think this one is more public good that has been suboptimally delivered, and therefore organizations are having to make up for something that government should or have been doing. So, yes, absolutely. So, the need to kind of create a framework for thinking about it speaks to the point that it has been delivered suboptimally so far. Yeah, as to who should be offering it, whether it's the market or the state, that will be an unending debate. So if you're from Kerala, certainly the state should be offering it. If you're from California, then certainly the company should be offering it. Um, so Murli asks, are there any research innovative models for engage employees to identify common wellness engagements rather than provide the menu? So as I said, there are a plethora of initiatives. There are also platforms that are out there. So, I mean, thinking carefully about what your employees need, I think, is important from an initiatives and implementation perspective. So George says 30 years ago, mindfulness was seen as a crazy practice, and it has now been normalized. Yeah, of course, times change. There's diffusion of all of these innovations indeed, um, uh, and as Shantaram says, there are clearly cultural differences here. Um, Yeah, and says, we need to be sensitive to that because it's a ticking time bomb. So thank you very much. So clearly self-selected in this topic has been super helpful for me to engage with you, although it's kind of through the chat and questions, but it's been super helpful for me to kind of rethink some of my assumptions and take a broader set of points into account as we dig further into this topic. So hopefully we'll come back with more findings and more case studies. So uh, thank you very much for being here, and I will bid you goodbye. And let me join you in the chat by thank you everyone. Thank you for being here and sharing your presence. All right, it was a good reconnect with some old friends and also a new audience. So have a good day wherever you are, and goodbye.